LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the June 20th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. I'll be using the 14 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, which would be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. You can see the topic of my video is Bigger News, inflation or evidence President Trump committed crimes. And those are kind of the dueling stories that the Sunday morning news analysis shows tried to cover yesterday. And it's not even a question that has a right answer. It's kind of a philosophical question about what is news, and they're both important stories, and we'll see coverage of the real news media, ABC, NBC, CBS, and CNN, and then of course we'll see how they treat it in the alternate universe of Fox News, where the evidence that President Trump committed crimes doesn't really get into pretty much the first half of the show, or very much any of the show, but I'll get to all that after I get to my political comedy clip, which is also on Fox News Bias. It's from this morning. They had breaking news about something that happened at the end of last week, where these writers and producers from the Late Show with Stephen Colbert got arrested trying to film skits in the Capitol building. And over on Fox News, they're like billing it as like the liberal insurrection or whatever. And so they have that breaking news. Then they have Chad Pergram, their reporter, reporting on it. And I don't know, it's almost like there's this journalistic hostage situation going on, where Chad Pergram tries to like stick in a little bit of news about what the January 6th committee hearings have found out. And like, this is the only coverage of that was in this entire 2-hour America's newsroom program up to this point. And then they go to Senator John Kennedy from Louisiana, who has like all of his weird sound bites prepared. And this is just like such an example of all the kinds of different bias that Fox News can fit into like a 5-minute clip. This is 5 minutes long from America's newsroom this morning, and I'll talk about it with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
7 producers from The Late Show with Stephen Colbert were arrested for unlawful entry to the United States Capitol building while filming a segment at a congressional office building. Chad Pergram is live on Capitol Hill. Chad, what happened here?
Dana, good morning. Capitol Police continue to investigate how the crew got into the Longworth House office building Thursday night. Republicans are now blasting Democrats for letting them in. Fox is told an aide for Massachusetts Democrat Jake Auchincloss allowed them in. Capitol Police shooed them away earlier Thursday. They were denied press credentials to cover the 1-6 committee hearings. The crew was shooting comedy skits about the investigation.
When you see these people come into the Capitol, it just shows that the Democrats are not serious. This is all political theater. This is a hypocritical double standard that they're trying to portray, and I think they've been busted on this.
You cannot be in the House office buildings after hours without an escort. That is, unless you have a congressional credential. This comes after the committee released a video which purports to show GOP Georgia Representative Barry Loudermilk giving what Democrats termed surveillance tours the day before the riot. The committee is methodically showing how the former president tried to cling to power.
I think one of the stunning things that we learned was, a federal judge, a very conservative federal judge, Michael Luttig, at the hearing, basically calling the former president of the United States and his supporters a clear and present danger to the American Republic.
The committee is starting to focus on Jenny Thomas. She's the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Jenny Thomas emailed with John Eastman about his scheme to have former Vice President Mike Pence reject electoral votes. Tomorrow's hearing focuses on efforts to convince state election officials to flip the election to former President Trump. Dana?
Chad Pergram in D.C. for us. Thank you.
I want to bring in Louisiana Republican Senator John Kennedy on this now. Senator, good morning to you. Got two topics for you, but I first want to start with this Colbert thing. How often in your experience do you find people without badges or ID roaming the halls of Congress or the office halls of Congress, in this case on the House side? How often does that happen?
Well, for me, never. And I don't have any inside information, Bill, but I've read about this, and it looks to me like it's just another example of a bunch of agenda journalists trying to make Democrats look good and Republicans look bad. And that's why I've said in another context, that's why the American people they're not fooled. They trust the media now like they trust gas station sushi. And the media, everybody knows that, but not everybody, but many members of the media have no self-awareness. They think they're fooling the American people.
Well, my guess is they were shooting skits, but I don't have any information to confirm that. I was just trying to read between the lines. And
I've read that they were knocking on Republicans' doors and trying to catch them off guard. I mean, it's just agenda journalism. That's all it is.
Yeah, and don't eat the sushi,
trying
right?
to pick sides.
That's the story there. The other issue is the protesters outside the homes of these Supreme Court justices.
Yeah.
Now, it's written in the law, intimidation is a federal violation, but apparently that's not the case, I guess, if you're on a sidewalk in a neighborhood in Maryland. And over the weekend, they were outside Coney Barrett's home as well. Here is Lieutenant Governor Winsome in the state of Virginia reacting on that.
I have no words when I see these grotesque images that these young girls are carrying. I think to myself, it must be that their parents feel the same and think the same as they do. And don't they realize the irony of this? The reason why you are here is because at some point your mother was pro-choice.
The story here, they had apparently props with dolls and blood, etc. And I mean, her point is that your mom was pro-choice. I thought this would end. And now I'm not so sure that it ever does.
Well, this is more than just about abortion. It's about respect for American institutions. I think most people can see that all of this is being driven by the anti-intellectual crypto-socialist woke left that the Biden administration has embraced and, frankly, that is in charge of in Washington, D.C. When the draft opinion was leaked, the wokers' response.
Okay, that was plenty. I'm sorry, I was frantically typing my last note there because I wanted ended with the anti-intellectual crypto-socialist woke left. That is just a lot of adjectives that I don't even know what they mean. But I kind of mentioned before our show that there seemed to be almost like a journalist hostage video going on with Chad Pergram where he was trying to commit some journalism on Fox News, like just saying what the January 6th committee had reported on. He talked about the scheme to get Mike Pence to reject electoral votes, didn't mention that it was illegal, that was the main focus of the hearings, the last January 6th committee hearings. But then there was that, the breaking news about Stephen Colbert's writers and production people breaking in or being in the Capitol without authority or whatever, even though it happened a few days ago. And the John Kennedy, the Republican senator from Louisiana, apparently thinks that Stephen Colbert is a journalist, an agenda journalist at that. And at one point, Bill Hemmer tries to correct him and say, "Oh, well, I think they might have been shooting skits, but I don't have any information to verify that," even though that's something his reporter, Chad Pergram, said a minute before. So I guess he doesn't trust Chad Pergram after he talked about what happened at the January 6th committee hearing. And then there was that weird clip from the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, Winsome Sears, who apparently thinks, every woman who decides not to have an abortion shows that she's pro-choice. I think she meant pro-life, which, I guess anyone can make a mistake, but then, like, Bill Hemmer repeats it as if there was no mistake, which is kind of another example of Fox News bias. And then, of course, there was that weird thing at the end. I was frantically typing the anti-intellectual crypto-socialist woke left. What does that even mean? Well, you can let me know what you think about that political comedy clip, but if you watch Fox News, that's the kind of stuff you're seeing. That's sort of the really brief coverage of the January 6th committee hearing, evidence that the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, is guilty of multiple federal felonies, as I've been covering the January 6th committee hearings in separate live streams from my Monday Media Mix-Up, and I'll continue doing that this week. And if you want to see my in-depth legal analysis based on my experience as a criminal defense attorney, you can go look at those videos. But I'm doing more media criticism here, and I'm now going to show you the 5 different news summaries from the 5 corporate media outlets. The best and longest one, as often happens, Chuck Todd had the biggest, longest package. He focused on mostly the right issues. There was an in-depth examination of the evidence that the former president committed crimes. This kind of focused more on the last January 6th committee hearing, even though there have been 2 since the Sunday shows a week ago. So you would think that they would talk about both hearings, but they really focused on the pressure on Mike Pence. And if I have any criticism, I'm going to criticize Fox News in a minute for not talking about the January 6th committee hearings at all in like the first half of their program. But I guess I should also criticize Meet the Press for not talking about inflation in the first 5 minutes of the show, that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch the NBC News Meet the Press coverage from yesterday together over here.
A good Sunday morning on this Juneteenth and a happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. 50 years after the Watergate break-in, we learned this week a lot about another president, Donald Trump, and all of that president's men. We learned at the January 6 hearings that Mr. Trump was told repeatedly that he'd lost the election, but that he continued to insist he'd won. And he spread the lie that the election was rigged anyway. We learned that Mr. Trump was told repeatedly that the idea that Vice President Mike Pence could unilaterally overturn the election was illegal and unconstitutional, but that he continued to pressure Pence to do so anyway. And we learned that the people advising Mr. Trump likely believed their plot was illegal and unconstitutional, but they urged Mr. Trump to go ahead anyway. What is emerging from this past week's hearing is the image of a president who was more defiant than delusional, who tried to hang on to power not because he thought it was right, but simply because he thought he could. Finally, we've learned that January 6th was no one-day event, but the end result of weeks of planning and scheming by a president who could not and cannot admit that he lost the election and was rejected by the American electorate. And standing in the way of Mr. Trump's plan was Mr. Pence, who ended up withstanding enormous pressure to go along with the scheme.
If Mike Pence does the right thing, we win the election.
In a relentless pressure campaign, Donald Trump pushed his vice president to overturn his loss, even as Pence's life was in danger. Though he knew his plan to have Pence obstruct electoral certification violated the law. Trump was told his election claims of fraud were false by his legal and campaign advisors again and again.
I thought, boy, if he really believes this stuff, he has, lost contact with he's become detached from reality.
But as Trump failed in earlier attempts to reverse the outcome, lawyer John Eastman began promoting a plan to have Pence refuse to certify electors. On January 4th, Trump and Pence met at the White House with Eastman, who acknowledged the plan was not legal.
Did John Eastman ever admit, or in front of the president, that his proposal would violate the Electoral Count Act?
I believe he did on the 4th.
But that evening in Georgia,
I hope Mike Pence comes through for us, I have to tell you.
On January 5th, Eastman acknowledged that the Supreme Court would reject the plan to keep Trump in power, in effect, a blueprint for a coup.
He initially started it, well, I think maybe you would lose only 7-2. And after some further discussion acknowledged, well, yeah, you're right, we would lose 9-0.
I said, are you out of your effing mind? I said, you're completely crazy. I said, you're going to turn around and tell 78+ million people in this country that your theory is this is how you're going to invalidate their votes?
On January 6th, Trump's pressure campaign only accelerated, beginning with a 1 a.m. tweet, then another at 8:17 a.m. Do it, Mike. Then with a phone call.
The conversation was pretty heated. It was a different tone than I'd heard him take with the vice president before.
Do you remember what she said her father called him?
The P word.
At the Ellipse that day after the call.
I hope Mike has the courage to do what he has to do. And I hope he doesn't listen to the rhinos and the stupid people that he's listening to.
At 12:53, Pence released a letter saying he didn't have the authority to overturn the will of the voters. At 1 p.m., he convened a joint session of Congress. By 12:57, the first group who had gathered at the Capitol to pressure Pence had reached the West Front, clashing with officers.
He deserves to burn with the rest of them. Pence voted against Trump.
Okay, and that's when all this started?
Yep, that's when we marched on the Capitol.
The president's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, was notified of the violence at the Capitol by 2 p.m. and likely earlier. The testimony further establishes that Mr. Meadows quickly informed the president. The rioters breached the Capitol at 2:13 p.m.
We thought that the president needed to tweet something and tweet something immediately.
Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts.
It felt like he was pouring gasoline on the fire by tweeting that.
The Secret Service couldn't control the situation and do their job.
At 2:26 p.m., Secret Service rushed Vice President Pence down the stairs. Approximately 40 feet. That's all there was. 40 feet between the vice president and the mob. That a confidential informant from the Proud Boys told the FBI that the Proud Boys would have killed Mike Pence if given a chance.
And joining me now is a member of the January 6th Select Committee, Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin.
And I'll have a clip of Jamie Raskin and Adam Schiff and Zoe Lofgren and Adam Kinzinger coming up in my Newsmaker clips, as well as the Senator Mike Lee clip for the first mention of the January 6th committee hearings on Fox News Sunday. Those will be the Newsmaker clips I'll show at the end of the news summaries. I don't know why they had to show that clip where Pete Aguilar said that the mob came within 40 feet of the vice president. That was just like a little mispronunciation. I don't know why they had to highlight that. And I pretty much pre-criticized that news summary that I thought it overemphasized the pressure on Mike Pence and not the previous hearing that was also in the last week before the last Sunday show about how Trump knew that he lost the election and lied about it anyway. And anyway, the second and third January 6th committee hearings were, I thought, really informative about the legal issues. And I thought that Meet the Press news summary focused more on like the violence and the threat of violence to Mike Pence. If you want to see more about the legal analysis, here in the live comments, I just put a link to my playlist, my 3 videos that have analyzed the January 6th committee hearings. And I'm going to be adding 2 more this week to that playlist. So if you want to see my legal analysis, and especially about how it was that nobody believed it was legal for one person, the vice president acting as president of the Senate, Mike Pence, to reject electoral votes or to send it all back to the states for investigation. That was like the John Eastman theory that even John Eastman didn't believe was legal. President Trump didn't believe it was legal. And I wish the Meet the Press news summary had spent more time talking about how it was illegal rather than, the more the part about the violence of the mob, which has more video, so it's like more news, or it's more sensational to show on a cable news channel, but it's not really the important issue about the illegality. So I want to move on to the next news summary, which is CBS News Face the Nation actually did the second longest news summary. They had a news report from Scott MacFarlane, who I've been following on Twitter for some of the best coverage of the January 6th riot defendants. He tweets them, tweets the court hearings for the defendants, and there's a lot of good information that he gives. You'll see here, it starts off with Margaret Brennan talking about the top stories. She talks about inflation. She talks about January 6th. She also talks about the approval of the COVID vaccine for children under 5 years old. That was covered by two of the anchors, and I think it's kind of interesting that it was the two women who are mothers who covered that as important news. And I'll talk about all of those issues a little more after we watch the CBS News Face the Nation news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We have a lot to get to today, including some long-awaited COVID news finalized just yesterday. Nearly 20 million children will finally have access to coronavirus vaccines after the CDC approved emergency use in infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. Relief for parents, but there is more economic anxiety. Fears of a recession are piling on top of struggles with inflation. The Federal Reserve hiked interest rates by 0.75 percentage point in the single largest increase in nearly 3 decades. But we begin with a crisis in our American democracy. The investigation into the January 6th attack and the elaborate scheming that led up to it. Lawmakers and witnesses are warning that the threat is not over. For more on what we learned and what's next in the hearings, here's CBS News congressional correspondent Scott MacFarlane.
On this vote, an unprecedented pressure campaign against a sitting vice president ended with Mike Pence in an underground loading dock beneath the Capitol for 4 hours January 6th. He'd been rushed into safety from the U.S. Senate chamber, and at one point, insurgents were just 40 feet away.
A confidential informant from the Proud Boys told the FBI that the Proud Boys would have killed Mike Pence if given a chance.
That day, he refused to leave.
The vice president did not want to take any chance that the world would see the vice president of the United States fleeing the United States Capitol.
Earlier that day, the president personally pressured Pence one last time before the electoral vote. Witnesses say he called Pence a wimp. In a speech Friday, the former president denied it.
I never called Mike Pence a wimp. I never called him a wimp.
But again, asserted Pence could have stopped the official certification of the electoral votes.
I said, well, what is he, a robot? He's a human conveyor belt.
The committee argued the already violent mob was egged on further by Trump's mid-afternoon tweet that Pence lacked courage.
I'm telling you, if Pence caved, we're going to drag mother through the streets.
A series of White House lawyers and aides described an elaborate, weeks-long effort to strong-arm Pence into executing a scheme devised by California lawyer John Eastman to reject some of the electoral votes and steal the election. White House lawyers testified the president and Eastman both knew the plan was bogus and unlawful. A Trump White House aide described a call to Eastman.
I said, are you out of your effing mind? I said, you're going to cause riots in the streets.
The committee has 2 hearings planned for the week ahead, including one in which they're expected to argue that Donald Trump tried to interfere with local election officials, including in Georgia. And CBS News has learned the committee also has a team investigating the role played by far-right groups, including their efforts to plot and plan ahead of the attack. Margaret?
Scott, thank you. We now want to go to Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren of California. She is in San Jose.
And I will have a clip of Zoe Lofgren along with Adam Kinzinger and Adam Schiff and Jamie Raskin from the January 6th committee as my Newsmaker clips, along with Senator Mike Lee of Utah, who was on Fox News Sunday, not on the committee. But both of those news summaries I thought covered the important topics of the week. well. Like I said, I'm a fan of Scott MacFarlane and his coverage of the January 6th rioters and their court trials and or their court hearings and what's going on. And he's followed a lot of their guilty pleas and those who even just like the various hearings. So I definitely recommend following Scott MacFarlane on Twitter for that information. Margaret Brennan and Scott MacFarlane there covered mostly the evidence that our former President Donald Trump committed crimes as the most important story of the last week, but also covered inflation and COVID, and so I guess maybe CBS News Face the Nation gets the most balanced coverage. The next two are ABC and Fox News, and ABC actually looked a lot like the Fox News news summary at the beginning of the program. Here's George Stephanopoulos and their business reporter, Rebecca Jarvis, starting off, this is the entire ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary from yesterday, never mentioning the January 6th committee hearings. So you would think, is this Fox News? And is there any difference between this ABC news summary and the Fox News Sunday news summary? And I actually will show you a difference after we watch the news summary together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. And to all the dads out there, happy Father's Day. As we head into summer, the U.S. economy has hit stiff headwinds. Inflation continues to climb. The stock market is coming off its worst week since the pandemic after the Fed announced its largest interest rate hike in nearly 30 years. Top CEOs and economists now expect a recession soon as Americans start to pull back on spending. Consumer sentiment hit its lowest levels on record last month. We're going to discuss it all with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen after this report from Chief Business Correspondent Rebecca Jarvis.
From gas prices to rent, soaring inflation forcing the Federal Reserve's hand this week. For the first time since Bill Clinton was in office nearly 30 years ago, the central bank hiking interest rates 0.75%.
What they're responding to now is a robust and growing economy. Of course, it could be slowed down too much.
Now, almost 3 decades later, with grocery prices up nearly 12%, airfares up almost 40%, and gas up nearly 50%, voters again are heading from the pump to the polls with the economy top of mind. The Fed's aggressive shift, coupled with historic inflation that's costing American families an extra $350 a month, already having an impact.
The economy and the country have been through a lot over the past 2.5 years and have proved resilient. It is essential that we bring inflation down.
The average 30-year fixed-rate mortgage has jumped from 3% to more than 6% this year. Stocks have plunged 23%. And just this week, early signs consumers are cutting back spending, with retail sales down 0.3% in May. Now, there's a real risk the Fed will have to induce a mild recession to stave off an even larger one, which might be smart economics, but not so great politics. A prominent poll taken days before the 1994 midterm elections found voters concerned and anxious over the economy and indicated broad disapproval of the Democratic majority in power. That election flipped both the House and Senate, ushering in the largest GOP majority in decades. Like then, recent polls indicate that voters from both parties consider the economy a major priority, listing it and inflation as their top concerns. With many economists expecting a recession in the coming months, the ever-present Russia-Ukraine conflict, and continuing supply chain issues, the question remains, 5 months until the midterm elections, will Democrats face a similar fate? For This Week, Rebecca Jarvis, ABC News, New York.
Thanks to Rebecca for that. We're joined now by the Secretary of Treasury, Janet Yellen.
And I'm actually going to have a short clip of Janet Yellen coming up that I didn't mention earlier, so I should let you know that's happening. But you saw there the This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, which never mention the January 6th committee hearings, which is going to make it very, very similar to the Fox News Sunday news summary you're about to see. And then another weird bias they spent a lot of time talking about the Clinton administration, which makes me, and, of course, George Stephanopoulos worked for the Clinton administration. That's why, and I wonder, is that why the news summary was kind of biased towards the lessons learned by George Stephanopoulos when he worked for Bill Clinton? That's kind of weird. But the one thing I promised before I showed this clip that differentiates the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary from the Fox News Sunday news summary I'm going to show you next is even though they never mentioned the January 6th committee hearings in that news summary, I usually just show you the news summaries, but I don't show you like the teaser before the news summary, which is like a minute and a half, 2 minutes, where they tease what they're going to talk about in the show before they show the host saying welcome and here we are for our Sunday show. Well, in the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, they actually did mention the January 6th committee hearings, which they did not do in the teaser from Fox News Sunday. So I will show that difference starting with the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news teaser that came before the news summary I just showed you, but did mention January 6th committee hearing information over here.
This Week with George Stephanopoulos starts right now.
Financial fear.
The labor market is extremely tight, and inflation is much too high.
The Fed hikes interest rates as prices rise and stocks fall.
Jobs are back, but prices are still too high. COVID is down, but gas prices are up. Our work isn't done.
Will taming inflation spark a recession? What's the president's plan for an unsettled economy? This morning, the woman at the center of it all, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, a This Week exclusive.
Bring out Pence! Bring out! Bring out Pence!
Under threat.
40 feet between the vice president and the mob.
I could hear the din of the rioters in the building. I don't think I was aware that they were as close as that.
The January 6th committee outlines Trump's lawless pressure on Pence, laying the groundwork for criminal charges.
He knew it was illegal. He knew it was wrong.
Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger on what's ahead. And
therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein on the 50th anniversary of Watergate.
In my public life,
Nixon and Trump are so alike in personality. It's all about Nixon. It's all about Trump.
Plus our Powerhouse Roundtable on all the week's politics.
From ABC News, it's This Week. Here now, George Stephanopoulos.
So yeah, that was the teaser, and it included information about the January 6th committee hearing, that Donald Trump did stuff that was illegal. It even talked about the hang Mike Pence stuff. That was all in the first, 90 seconds of the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary. And even they had Bob Woodward on to talk about the 50th anniversary of Watergate, and they even included a clip there that Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein on to talk about it, and included a clip that showed that Bob Woodward thinks Donald Trump and Richard Nixon have like very similar personalities. So even though the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary I showed you before did not mention the January 6th committee hearings at all, the 90 seconds that came before that, I think, at least exonerate them a little bit from the bias I'm about to talk about on the Fox News Sunday news summary, where they never mentioned January 6th. That, like I said, that even though ABC didn't show it, they talked about it in the first 90 seconds, but here is the first, it's 84 seconds of the Fox News Sunday program. Shannon Bream doing an intro, never mentions the January 6th committee hearings. And after that, I'll show the news summary, which also never mentions the evidence that the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, committed crimes, which ABC mentioned in their first 90 seconds, but Fox News Sunday did not mention in the first 84 seconds over here.
I'm Shannon Bream. The Federal Reserve's moves to cool the red-hot economy rattle markets as Americans feel the financial strain.
The current picture is plain to see, and inflation is much too high.
Increased rates meaning borrowers will pay more for loans for homes and cars, while national gas prices hover around $5 a gallon.
Inflation. It's sapping the strength of a lot of families.
We'll ask the president's chief economic advisor, Brian Deese, whether the solution could spark a new set of problems.
We all made a commitment to each other that we were supportive of the framework.
There are a couple of issues that need to be settled.
Stalled negotiations over gun reform as talks spill into the weekend, with a deadline to hold votes next week looming. We will ask Republican Senator Mike Lee whether the bill is in jeopardy. Plus, more questions about President Joe Biden's prospects for another term. We'll ask our Sunday panel what it means if the mainstream media and Democrats abandon him. Fox News Sunday is on the road to the midterms. We'll take you to a small-town Virginia diner where patrons are trying to bridge political divides. All right now on Fox News Sunday.
So yeah, that was the teaser from Fox News Sunday. I'm not going to show you clips from that discussion about this conservative town in Virginia where all the people they talked to were white, apparently. And I watched the whole thing. Trust me, they were all white. And they were pretty much all conservative. Like, one guy talked about how his dead wife was liberal, but they were like, and they were talking about how all these like white people can talk about issues without all this rancor we see in the country. And in this one like very red conservative town in Virginia, that was ridiculous. But I'm sorry about that. But you saw how Shannon Bream introduced the program with no mention of the January 6th committee hearings in the teaser. Unlike ABC, they did, however, include talk that Joe Biden might not run again in 2024, and that's been a big news story on Fox News like every hour for the last week. So the Fox News Sunday is becoming less and less journalistic since the exit of Chris Wallace, I guess. But anyway, that was the teaser, no mention of January 6th, and it's no better in the actual news summary from Fox News Sunday, which actually looks a lot like the ABC news summary because they're talking mostly about economic problems, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together over here.
Hello again and happy Father's Day from Fox News in Washington. There are growing concerns this week over the economy as the Federal Reserve made its biggest hike since 1994, aiming to curb soaring inflation. The stock market seeing its worst week since the beginning of the pandemic, with the Dow falling below 30,000 for the first time since January 2021. The president says recession isn't inevitable, and he's pledging to go to war with big oil to lower prices at the pump, telling energy executives to produce more, while critics say he's pointing fingers at a situation he helped create. In a moment, we ask the U.S. National Economic Council Director Brian Deese about the administration's challenges. But first, let's turn to Lucas Tomlinson live at the White House for more on the increasing pressure to do something to curb rising prices. Lucas.
Shannon, President Biden taking aim at the oil industry as gas prices remain at record-setting levels nationwide.
They can drill, but they're not doing it.
President Biden threatening oil companies with, quote, emergency powers if they don't boost supply to lower gas prices. Exxon firing back, saying in a statement the White House can promote investment through clear and consistent policy. American refiners say they're already operating at near max capacity, roughly 95%. According to the Oil and Gas Journal, U.S. oil production in May now within 3% of January's 2020 record high before the pandemic.
The fact that they're pumping more than they ever have before, and they have so many leases available to them, suggests that they have the ability to pump more.
The American people are bracing for a very pricey summer, and they know exactly who to blame.
Half the country blames Biden for the spike in gas prices. About 3 in 10 Americans blame Putin. To bring down inflation, the Federal Reserve conducted the largest rate hike in nearly 30 years.
We at the Fed understand the hardship that high inflation is causing.
Higher interest rates means Americans will pay more to borrow money.
The inflationary pressures that we're seeing in the country today have everything to do with the president and his policies, and the American people are paying the price for that.
The White House and top Democratic lawmakers are in talks to pass more legislation to fight inflation, in addition to those gun control measures. Shannon?
Lucas Tomlinson reporting from the White House. Lucas, thank you. And joining us here in Washington, Brian Deese.
And Brian Deese was on a couple programs. I won't show you any clips from him, but I will show you a Janet Yellen clip. And I'm not saying the inflation and possible recession story isn't an important news story, but I'm saying evidence that the former president, Donald Trump, committed crimes that has been presented pretty clearly in the week since the last time the Sunday show aired. That's really important information that didn't make it into the Fox News Sunday news summary, didn't make it into their teaser, so that differentiates it from ABC, where they actually at least talked about it in the teaser and talked about it extensively later in the program. Not much discussion of a former president being guilty of federal felonies on Fox News Sunday. You saw in my first political comedy clip how Chad Pergram tried to slip in a little journalism on Fox News, even though it's not a journalistic organization. If you read this book over here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, you will learn that Roger Ailes, the deceased former head of Fox News, created Fox News for the purpose of being a partisan outlet for the Republican Party, for basically being the communications wing of the Republican Party. So what happened to Richard Nixon when he committed crimes could never happen to a Republican president again. So I appreciate ABC for making that comparison to the 50th anniversary of the Watergate break-ins, and the personality of Richard Nixon, very similar to the personality of Donald Trump, the malignant narcissism, if you will, though I don't want to engage in some sort of psychological or psychiatric diagnosis here. But anyway, the final news summary I want to show you before I get to the newsmakers is CNN's State of the Union, where Dana Bash talked about inflation and possibility of recession. She talked about the January 6th committee hearings, and also as the other woman and mother host of the five. Well, I don't know, is Shannon Bream a mother? I don't know, but Shannon Bream didn't mention the possibility of children under 5 getting COVID vaccinations, but Margaret Brennan and Dana Bash did, and kudos to them for including that in their news summaries, as well as the other important stories. And here's the shortest of the news summaries to juxtapose with the other 4 that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the state of our union is worried about our democracy and our wallets. Yet, there is one bright spot this Father's Day. Children as young as 6 months old are now eligible for COVID-19 vaccines after more than 2 years of the pandemic. But this bit of good news comes as even President Biden is acknowledging in a rare interview that Americans are, quote, really, really down. Well, here's why. Americans are watching their 401ks plummet as the economy faces the highest inflation in decades and record high gas prices. The threat to the economy is sharing a split screen with the threat to democracy. The ongoing January 6th hearings are now entering their 3rd week. And this Tuesday, the January 6th committee is expected to move the argument from former President Trump's pressure on state officials to change the elections. Officials from Georgia and Arizona are expected to testify, including the Georgia Secretary of State, Republican Brad Raffensperger, who recently defeated a Trump-backed opponent in his Republican primary. Remember, Trump asked Raffensperger to find, quote, 11,000 plus votes during a very, very long call, January 2nd, 2021.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
What does it mean for the committee's case? Here with me now exclusively is the man leading the next hearing, Intelligence Committee Chairman and member of the January 6th Committee, Adam Schiff. Thank you so much for joining.
And I will have a clip of Adam Schiff coming up, and I just checked while I was showing those that last clip. Shannon Bream is a mother, but apparently not a mother who cares about reporting on the vaccinations available now for children under 5, though I guess Republicans don't even care about vaccinations because they're kind of anti-vax, or I don't know, at least they won't publicly claim that they're pro-vaccination. But anyway, I just realized that as I was showing you the 5 news summaries, that Shannon Bream actually was a woman and a mother, but didn't fall into the category with Margaret Brennan and Dana Bash as having reported on something important to parents. I don't think only mothers are parents, because as my longtime viewers know, one of the reasons I started uploading videos to YouTube is because I spent many years as a stay-at-home dad, and so I think fathers can be just as important as parents, as mothers, but it just seems in the corporate news media, it's the mothers who care about issues about children, and I thought it was kind of weird that Dana Bash and Margaret Brennan supported that analysis, but Shannon Bream, from the more like culturally traditional news outlet of Fox News Sunday and Fox News, she didn't report. Well, I guess it's because Fox News and Republicans don't think that COVID vaccinations are a good thing, or maybe that's why. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section, and I've been watching the live viewer comments while I've been showing the clip, so I appreciate your participation. But now I want to get to the Newsmaker clips, and the first 2 I want to show you were kind of like, I want to show how Fox News covered the January 6th committee hearings finally when talking to Republican Senator Mike Lee, and then how ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos covered the inflation story, which all of the non-Fox News outlets did cover the inflation story, and I thought in a reasonable way, but Fox News Sunday did not cover the January 6th committee hearings in a reasonable way. The first mention was like more than halfway into the program when they had Senator Mike Lee on, and then they just asked him about some texts that had been reported on in a Utah newspaper without even showing you what his texts were and what his involvement in the overthrow of the election in 2020 was. And anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that very soft questioning of Republican Senator Mike Lee by Republican so-called journalist Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday over here.
Issue this big. Okay, I want to move to another top headline issue. The January 6th hearings continue to go on. What we heard this week is that the president had a number of his advisors tell him there was not enough evidence of fraud to change the election results to be in his favor for 2020. The president speaking out on that, the former president this weekend, here's what he said.
What you're seeing is a complete and total lie. It's a complete and total fraud.
All right, that's his take on it. Your own text messages have come up with respect to Mark Meadows. They've been highlighted. Here's what the Salt Lake Tribune said about that. Their headline, quote, new court filings raise questions about Senator Mike Lee's involvement in attempts to overturn the 2020 election. Your response?
Well, first of all, look, I knew how bad Joe Biden would be as president. I knew what a disaster he would be in the Oval Office. And there was some uncertainty in the wake of the election. As we approached the end of December, there were rumors that continued to circulate suggesting that some states were going to be withdrawing and reallocating their electoral votes. Because Congress has a role in that, and I as a senator would be required to certify those, I wanted to find out. So I communicated with Mark Meadows to try to find out whether the rumors were true. I couldn't get answers, so I reached out to state lawmakers in various states, not trying to influence anyone, simply trying to find out whether the rumors were true. The rumors weren't true. No state had any intention of withdrawing its slate of electoral votes, and that made it an easy decision on my part to vote to certify the results of the election.
Has the committee asked to talk to you in the form of a deposition or otherwise, and would you sit down with them?
No, they haven't.
So yeah, that was pretty much the only coverage of the January 6th committee hearings on Fox News Sunday until they got to their panel discussion where they had their panelists talk about it in terms of like, oh, not enough people watched it and it's not really changing anybody's minds. That's some of the talking points that they come back to on Fox News. Even though like 20 million people watched the primetime hearing, and even the daytime hearings have gotten like more viewers than you would expect from that type of daytime offering. So that was pretty weak from Shannon Bream. And you notice Shannon Bream didn't even show the text of some of the or didn't show what it was that Mike Lee texted to Mark Meadows. Some of them were like pretty damning, like, just tell me what you want me to say. And I'm not even going to go into that, but that was really soft cross-examination and shows the really weak coverage of evidence that our former president, Donald Trump, committed federal felonies. You would think that would be bigger news, but not on Fox News. And then just the opposite story where you would wonder, are, like the rest of the media going to be weak on covering inflation and possibility of recession, and because that's bad for the Democratic administration? So are they biased like all, the lamestream media, the liberal media, as they... No, they're all covering that. And just to juxtapose with the Mike Lee non-cross-examination from Shannon Bream, here is George Stephanopoulos cross-examining the Treasury Secretary of the Biden administration on the possibility of recession over in this clip.
The Wall Street Journal reported this morning that 44% of economists expect a recession in the next year. Is that what you expect as well?
Well, I expect the economy to slow. It's been growing at a very rapid rate as the labor market has recovered and we have reached full employment. It's natural now that we expect a transition to steady and stable growth. But I don't think a recession is at all inevitable. Chair Powell, clearly inflation is unacceptably high. It's President Biden's top priority to bring it down. And Chair Powell has said that his goal is to bring inflation down while maintaining a strong labor market. That's going to take skill and luck, but I believe it's possible. I don't think a recession is inevitable.
You say it's not inevitable. I guess the question is it likely? We're already seeing consumers start to pull back on services, especially. Some signs that the job market may be slowing as well.
So yeah, the inflation issue was covered extensively on all four of the other corporate outlets other than Fox News, the four journalistic outlets, compared to the very minimal coverage of evidence that our former president committed federal felonies. That wasn't covered very well on Fox News, but that was good coverage on ABC. And that's kind of the question about whether it's news, is like the opinion of Biden administration officials about whether there's going to be a recession. Is that news? I guess it's locking them down on their predictions of the future, but I mean, nobody can predict the future. And as I've talked about extensively on previous Monday media mix-ups, the responsibility for, even though Biden is definitely going to get the political blame for inflation and gas prices and all that, that's what happens to presidents. They get the blame whether they're responsible or not. But if you really understand why there is inflation now, the Biden administration has actually very little responsibility. The biggest responsibility is the Fed for not raising interest rates sooner, and then there's the supply chain problems and COVID are probably second, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine is probably third, and maybe some spending by both Democrats and the Trump administration, because remember, it was the Trump administration that did most of the deficit spending, because that's what affects inflation, because inflation is caused by too much money in the economy chasing too few goods. And government spending doesn't put too much money in the economy unless it's not paid for. And the Biden administration has actually been cutting the deficit by a huge amount compared to the Trump administration. The Trump administration was the one most responsible for this deficit spending after their irresponsible tax cut for the rich, which also increased the deficit. So because spending doesn't cause inflation if it's paid for, because taxes take money out of the economy just as well as spending puts money into the economy. It's only when the spending's not paid for that it causes inflation. So anyway, I wanted to do that quick analysis before I get to my final 4 Newsmaker clips, which were all members of the January 6th committee talking about the other issue, whether the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, is going to be charged with crimes, starting with Jamie Raskin. Actually, I think he gives the best answer as to what the criteria are that the Justice Department should be considering in determining whether Donald Trump should be charged with crimes over on NBC News' Meet the Press with Chuck Todd in this clip.
Is just getting an historical record enough, or does there need to be some justice somewhere?
Yeah, there needs to be accountability, and accountability can mean 2 things. One is individual criminal accountability, that people pay for their particular crimes, as more than 800 people have already been prosecuted for everything from assaulting a federal officer to interfering with a federal proceeding to seditious conspiracy, which means conspiracy to overthrow and put down the government of the United States. But accountability also means collective accountability, and that's the real project that we're engaged in under House Resolution 503, telling the truth to the people so we can make decisions about how to fortify democratic institutions going forward.
President Trump lashed out the committee and lashed out Vice President Pence just in the last 48 hours. And essentially has not changed his view. He calls Mike Pence weak, says, I think he called him a conveyor belt. This public admission that essentially he wanted continues after laying out all this evidence. Is he confessing?
Yeah, he's essentially saying, yeah, I did it and I'll do it again, which is what we have been contending all along, that if you allow impunity for attempts at unconstitutional seizures of power, which is what a coup is, then you're inviting it again in the future. And to be a strong, self-sustaining, self-respecting democracy, we can't allow people to decide that they are above the law and that they are more important than our constitutional processes.
Do you think every time Donald Trump goes out there and essentially readmits to what he did, what should be the reaction of the Attorney General every time the former president does this?
Well, you know, the Attorney General really shouldn't be reacting to particular provocations by particular politicians or criminals. I mean, that's not really the role of the Attorney General. The role of the Attorney General is to determine, based on the facts and the law, whether there's probable cause to believe that somebody has violated the federal law in the United States, and then to follow the criteria of the Department of Justice. You've got to look at the culpability of the defendant, to what extent they acted willfully to do a criminal act. You've got to look at the gravity and nature of the offense. Of course, this offense has massive implications for the rule of law in America. And you've got to look at deterrence. That is, do we want to move into a system of government where losers in presidential elections can try to overturn the election by nonviolent or violent means?
Given everything you know, if you were in his shoes, do you think this is a close call or not?
You know, I'll leave that judgment to them. I mean, one of the many things that Donald Trump destroyed during his time in office was the idea that the political branches have to respect the independence of the law enforcement function. You know, so that really is up to them. And we're talking about people who are very competent.
You're familiar with the law. You were a constitutional law professor before you got into this job. Do you believe that this is a close call for Merrick Garland?
I mean, again, I come back to the culpability of the defendant, the nature of the offense, which I think is extraordinarily grave here. It's hard to think of a more grave offense. And the question of deterrence, and is it important to deter coups and insurrections? And I would say yes, but I think that's as deep as I want to get into the weeds on it.
All right.
So yeah, I actually thought Jamie Raskin gave the best answer on the Sunday shows about the criteria that the Justice Department should be using to decide whether Donald Trump should be charged with crimes. And the three criteria he gave all weigh heavily in favor of going forward with a prosecution of Donald Trump. The culpability, that's what the January 6th committee hearings have been showing, that Donald Trump knew he lost. He tried to overturn the election results anyway. He definitely had consciousness of guilt. And then there's the nature, gravity of the offense. It's like a hugely important offense for our democracy. It could like overturn our entire democratic republic, as I've talked about in my live streams about the January 6th committee hearings. And then he also talks about deterrence to make sure it doesn't happen again, even though there seem to be a lot of Republicans who are preparing to do it again, but with more success than they did in 2020. So kudos to Jamie Raskin for laying that out. I don't think Adam Schiff did quite as good a job on CNN's State of the Union, but I will talk about his answer to Dana Bash on this same topic after we watch it together over here.
Congresswoman Zoe Lofgren told my colleague Jake Tapper this week that some information has been provided on a confidential basis from your committee to the Justice Department. You know this, I'm sure you're hearing this. So many people watching your committee hearings are asking, what is going to come of this? Is the Justice Department going to file criminal charges? First question is, why haven't you given everything over to the Justice Department that they are asking for and they say they need in order to potentially do that?
I don't think Congress has ever done that, and I've been participating now in several investigations where there have been parallel investigations done by the Justice Department. Congress never says, hey, Justice Department, other branch of government, just come and go through our files. We also don't say, hey, we want to go over and just rifle through your files. When the Justice Department asks for things specifically, hey, you know, we're looking at a case, we're investigating this person, can you give us what you have? We work with them, and we'll work with them here. You know, I do want to point out the Justice Department has the subpoena power too. They can convene a grand jury, they can bring in witnesses. Traditionally, they don't wait for Congress to do that work for the department. So we're going to work with them. We want them to be successful in bringing people to justice. But I can't go into the private conversations.
Well, have you seen evidence that the Justice Department has already opened an investigation into the former president?
You know, just looking at the public record, I have not seen, for example, grand juries convene in places where I would think they would be convened if they were looking at some of the conduct, for example, that Judge Carter in California wrote. He believed that Donald Trump was engaged in multiple acts that violate the criminal laws.
You've been critical of the Justice Department for moving slowly. If you've done so much work, why not help them out?
Well, you know, we certainly will help them. We want them to particularize what they're asking for. And it's our intention when we conclude our investigation to make public our findings in great detail. But we have a job to do as well, and we are doing that, and we're doing this consistent with how our branch of government has operated and the executive branch has operated.
We've seen a lot of taped testimony from the hundreds, even more, of closed-door testimony.
So yeah, that is the answer from Adam Schiff talking about the criminal culpability of President Trump. And then the third Democrat I want to show you is Zoe Lofgren over on CBS News' Face the Nation, answering a similar question from Margaret Brennan over here.
Well, for the busy American people who may not have been watching the hearings as closely as we were, exactly what is the end game here? Are you laying out a roadmap for the Department of Justice to ultimately try to prosecute the former president?
We are doing what we were asked to do when the committee was formed, which is to find the truth, lay it out, and we will also be making legislative recommendations. For example, the Electoral Count Act was violated. Dr. Eastman admitted as much, but we think we can tighten that up so it's less susceptible to abuse. We're working, especially Liz Cheney and I are working on that. The Department of Justice has to make its own decision. We're laying out facts. They can see it, but I'm sure they have access to other information because they've got grand juries meeting with various defendants. We are going to be helpful to them in terms of specific information that they wish from our own investigation, but they've got to, it's not the role of Congress to decide who gets prosecuted.
Well, a number of your committee members, your fellow committee members, have criticized Attorney General Garland for not moving faster. So they do want to see some kind of action here. And there was this letter from the Justice Department asking for transcripts and saying that your committee failure to immediately hand them over was complicating their investigation. Exactly what is going on here?
Well, that was we were surprised by that, frankly, and we will engage. We're not going to be an obstacle to the Department of Justice prosecution of individuals. We're in the middle of putting these hearings together. The staff is working, incredibly hard along with the members of Congress, where we will get, particular information that they need over to them in an orderly way, certainly by the beginning of next month.
By the beginning of next month.
So yeah, those were the three Democrats talking to the Sunday morning news analysis shows about whether President Trump should be prosecuted for crimes. And then one of the two Republicans from the committee was also on the Sunday shows. This is Adam Kinzinger over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, asked a question by George Stephanopoulos about whether we can prove Donald Trump's intent to commit a crime. I've talked about this extensively in my live streams covering the committee hearings. If you want to watch my live streams covering the committee hearings, I put that link to the playlist into the chat there. And if you want to see Adam Kinzinger's response to George Stephanopoulos, that's the final Newsmaker clip I will share with you today over here.
You say the president knew what he was doing, and 6 in 10 Americans, according to our new poll with Ipsos, believe the president should be criminally prosecuted for his role in the January 6th insurrection. But as you know, there are difficulties in prosecution as well. Proving state of mind, proving intent is the key factor there. How do you do that?
Look, what we can do from the committee's perspective is show, as we have so far, for instance, the pressure that was coming down on Mike Pence and how the president knew what he was doing and how he had been stopped prior at other areas. We're going to be talking Thursday about some of the stuff with the DOJ. We're going to have a discussion Tuesday about state pressure. And so you can see where the president knew all of that stuff. We can, I think, show the American people that. Now, what can the Department of Justice do in a court of law? That's up to them. They can, have their own information. They'll be able to see what we're doing here. And it truly is unprecedented. But let's be honest. This attack on January 6th is unprecedented. And the rot that led up to it is also unprecedented. It is essential at this moment that we get a grip on this and figure out how to defend our democracy.
It's up to the Department of Justice in the end, but have you reached the conclusion that President Trump should be prosecuted?
I certainly think the president is guilty of knowing what he did, seditious conspiracy, being involved in these, kind of different segments of pressuring DOJ, vice president, et cetera. Obviously, we're not a criminal charges committee, so I want to be careful in specifically using that language. But I think what we're presenting before the American people certainly would rise to a level of criminal involvement by a president and definitely failure of the oath. The oath has to matter here. Your personal demand to stand for the Constitution has to matter. And if you have people that don't regard that at all, there is no law in the world that we can pass that's going to make a bit of difference.
You're in a small minority among Republicans, only one of two Republicans.
So yeah, that was the one Republican from the committee who was on the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I thought his analysis was a little bit weaker, more violation of the oath. Donald Trump shouldn't run again, more than he should be criminally prosecuted, which the evidence definitely supports a criminal prosecution, as especially Jamie Raskin explained when he talked about the 3 criteria that the Department of Justice should use on that issue about whether Donald Trump had shown culpability, whether there was the nature and gravity of the offense was strong, and whether it would deter future people from trying to overturn elections like Donald Trump did. So I think I agree more with Jamie Raskin than Adam Kinzinger, but you can let me know what you think in the comment section. Or for the live viewers, that was the last of the Newsmaker clips, my final clip that I'm going to show to you. And actually, I've kind of been dreading this part of the live stream where I no longer have a bonus Dash or Sandy clip or Dash and Sandy clip to show you. I guess from now on, whenever I do a live stream, I'm going to be reminded about how my dog Sandy died in February and my cat Dash died 4 days ago, and hopefully it will get a little easier to do live streams as the weeks go on. And I did tell you I will be doing a couple more analyses of the January 6th committee hearings this week. There are 2 coming up this week, and I'll try to do them either the same day or the next day and provide my political commentary and my media or congressional criticism, and also my legal analysis based on my years as a criminal defense attorney. And anyway, I hope you will join me for those live streams, even though I no longer have bonus Dash and Sandy clips to show at the end. And anyway, until maybe Tuesday when I do which is tomorrow, when I do my coverage of the next January 6th committee hearing, or later in the week, or next Monday when I do my Monday media mix-up, I guess I will be seeing all of you